Hello, my name is Bart and I am a WeCora/add-on developer for Liquid Guild. The purpose of this video is to showcase my add-on Timeline Reminders. I made a little video on it directly after Nerubar Palace, but since then the add-ons evolved a lot, so I figured I'd record a new one. Timeline Reminders lets players view encounters on a timeline, as you can see here, and lets them easily add custom reminders to it that will then show up during the fight. One thing that's very important to me, and I hope you're able to tell, is that the user interface remains intuitive and easy to understand. So not too many bells and whistles and like try and put everything in a logical place. I know from personal experience that it's very hard to make raiders adopt new tech when it's not immediately obvious how it works. So let's get into how the add-on actually works. So to start with, you can open up the add-on by typing TR for Timeline Reminders. You can also go to your add-on compartment, which is the little number close to your minimap, and select Timeline Reminders there. So as I said, we're currently looking at a boss timeline. This particular one is Nexus Princess Skyveza, and you can use this drop-down to view the timeline for any other boss. So we have Nerubar Palace, we have Liberation of Undermine, and each of the bosses has a heroic/normal timeline and a mythic timeline. There's also dungeon timelines for the dungeon bosses, but we'll be looking at a raid timeline right now. So let's look at mythic timeline for Rick Reverb. So you can right-click and hold the button to scroll through the timeline. And each of these rectangles that you see correspond to one of the abilities on the left. You can hover your cursor over the abilities to see their tooltips. And if there's any abilities that you're not interested in, you can just disable them. So let's say you're not very interested in seeing Echoing Chant. You can uncheck this checkbox here, and it won't show up on your timeline anymore. You can also use the scroll wheel to scroll out or scroll in. And you can, of course, make the window larger or smaller to see more of the timeline at once. Right, so these bold white lines that you see represent phase changes. And each reminder that you place on a timeline is relative to the phase change that came before it. And this is very useful for fights where the phase change timer is variable, so might depend on your DPS, etc. So that just makes sure that, let's say I put a reminder for this sound cannon right here, that it'll always show up for this sound cannon. So let's take a look at how to actually create a reminder for ourselves. You can do so by double-clicking anywhere on the timeline. Let's say we want to create a reminder for the second grand finale. We just double-click here, and as you can see, it now created the reminder. This also pops up the reminder config window, and you can use this to customize what the reminder says or what it looks like. I'll just go through all of these options one by one and explain what they do. First, you have the target dropdown. This determines who this reminder will show for. By default, this is set to the class you are playing as you made the reminder, but you can set it to any of these options. So let's say you want this reminder to show up for every single character you might play on a fight, you just set it to all. Then you have duration. This determines how long the reminder will show for. And then you have relative to and time. You shouldn't really have to touch these. These are automatically populated depending on where on the timeline you create the reminder. So don't worry about these. Then there is the reminder type. There's two types of reminders you can make. It's either a text reminder or a spell reminder. For a text reminder, you can put anything in this text field right here, like jump in the air. And this is what will show on your screen during the fight. Then there's spell reminders. You can set spell reminders either by manually inputting the spell ID, or you can select it from this dropdown right here. So let's say we want to make a reminder for evangelism. An extra option pops up here, hide on use. And what this does is when the reminder shows up, if you use the actual ability that you set the reminder for during the timer, like while the reminder is showing, it will instantly hide. When this is checked, you also get this extra option, linger. And what this does is it makes the reminder stay on your screen even after the timer finished. And this is just to make sure you actually use the ability. And then there's color, and that's just the color of the reminder as it shows in your screen. Let's make this one red and give it a little test. So there's a test button here in the bottom left. And what this does is it'll just pop up the reminder on your screen, and you can see what it'll look like during the fight. So there it is, evangelism, and since I have hide on use checked, if I use evangelism, boom, it'll go away. There's also a few optional checkboxes here that add some effect to your reminder. So first we have text-to-speech, and this just plays a text-to-speech during the reminder. So this has three options. The first is @remaining. If this is set to 0, the text-to-speech will play when the reminder expires. If we set it to, let's say, 3, it'll play when there's 3 seconds remaining on the reminder. You can select different voices, and you can also put in an alias. So what this alias does is it'll override, like by default, the text-to-speech will just call out the actual ability, but we can put something else in here to make the text-to-speech say something different. So let's say you put in ramp here, the text-to-speech will now read out ramp instead of evangelism. Then we have sound. This is similar to text-to-speech. It has the @remaining option and a drop down to select a different sound. And then we have countdown, and this counts down instead of just play a sound. So you can select from how many seconds it'll count down, and you can select an AI voice that'll count down for you. And then lastly, we have glow. So for evangelism, this doesn't make much sense, but let's say we made a reminder for pain suppression, and we really want the pain suppression Max, then we'd put in Max's name here, and it'll glow his frame while the reminder is showing. You see a little preview of what the glow will look like here. You can select a bunch of different glows and make it different colors. And you could even put in multiple names here. So let's say we have 2 charges on pain suppression, and we want to glow Max and Dryny. Then we put 2 names in, and it'll glow both of their frames. Then lastly, there are 2 buttons in the bottom left here that we haven't talked about yet. First, we have export. This lets you export the reminder to either an MRT note format, so you can put it in your MRT note for others to see, or you can export it to a string, which other players could then import into their Timeline Reminders add-on and get this exact reminder on their timeline. And then we have the Make Default button, which makes it so the settings you have here are applied automatically when you create a new reminder. So whatever settings you have, let's say you want a countdown and a sound at 5 seconds remaining, you can make this the default. And then when you make a new reminder, it automatically adopts these settings that you just set as the default. This is pretty useful, mostly for like the duration you like to see. And maybe if you want text-to-speech on all of your reminders, you can set that to be the default. Let's say I want all my reminders to show for 10 seconds and I want text-to-speech. I could just set this as the default. And then whenever I make a new reminder, it's 10 seconds and there's a text-to-speech attached to it. Probably remove this alias from your default as well. So we've now made 3 reminders and you can see them here on the timeline. You can see that this is a spell reminder for pain suppression, so it has the spell icon. And these are both text reminders, so they have this little text page icon. If you make multiple reminders in the same spot, they'll just show up neatly one under the other. And you can tell from the tooltip what they do. So you can see this will show up a red pain suppression text, and it has a sound and a countdown attached to it, which are the icons to the left of the pain suppression icon. You can also see that it'll show for everyone, so that is any character that you might be playing. To delete reminders, you can either click them and delete them using this X in the config window, or you could middle mouse click them to quick delete them, similar to closing browser tabs. To adjust where the reminders actually show up in your screen, you can go into the anchor settings in the top right, and this will show an anchor for both spell reminders and text reminders. You can use the test button to pop up a bunch of random reminders to show what they would look like. And there's a bunch of things you can adjust: the alignment, the text size, where they grow, and their fonts. For spell reminders, there's these 2 extra options. You could opt to only show icons and not show the text. And you can opt to show spell reminders as text reminders. And what this does is it'll make any spell reminders show up on the text reminder anchor along with the text reminders. So effectively, what this does is it'll make all your reminders show up in the same spot. So let's say I want all of my reminders to be in the center of my screen. I'll just check this, move the text reminder anchor to the center. It'll nicely snap in place. And then all of my reminders, regardless of their type, will all show up here. You can have multiple profiles per timeline for a boss. So let's say we are playing a healing priest and we want different reminders for ourselves based on which other classes we're healing with. You go to this dropdown and you create a new profile. When you do so, it prompts you to put in a name and a color. So let's call this 3 heal, Resto Sham, Holy Paladin, and give it a nice pink color. And now it swaps to the new profile we just created. So notice that the reminders we had on our timeline previously now disappeared. And that's because they belong to this other profile called default profile. And we are now working on our 3 heal profile with the Resto Shami and the Holy Paladin. You can delete profiles by clicking this X right here. Or you can click the settings button to change their name and their color. So this default profile, let's say this was a 4 heal profile, and we give it a nice green color, and then we can put in different reminders based on what we're doing and what we want to see. The profile that shows up during the fight is the one you have selected here. So if you want the 4 heal profile to show up while you are fighting Rick Reverb Mythic, you would just select this one here, and that makes these reminders show up when you pull the boss. Timeline Reminders doesn't just show reminders that you've set yourself in the add-on, it'll also show reminders that you or anyone else has put into the MRT node. So let's quickly open up MRT and paste in some reminders. And you can see they now show up on your timeline as these light blue reminders that look slightly different from the ones you've set yourself. You can still hover your cursor over them to see what they'll show, and they'll just show up just as any other reminder would. You may have noticed that I am playing a priest, but I can see a time spiral and a rewind reminder on my timeline. And this brings us to the settings menu in the top right, and there is an option that reads show relevant reminders only. When you check this, it'll remove any reminders from the timeline that are not meant for the character you're currently playing. Now, these irrelevant reminders will never show up during the fight, even if you have this unchecked. Just having this unchecked means you can inspect other people's reminders that are in the MRT node as well. Then you have these 2 options, and these control whether the add-on will take reminders from your public node and your personal node. So let's say I do not want it to read from my public node, I just want to use my personal node, I would uncheck this. And as you can see, all of the reminders I just put in the public node disappear from my timeline. Then we have the option to ignore MRT in dungeons. And what this does is, let's say you are playing a dungeon after your raid and you still have these reminders in there that your raid leader put in from when you were raiding. You'd otherwise pull a dungeon boss and these would show up during the fight. So this is just if you don't want to use the add-on in dungeons, you can check this and you'll never accidentally have your raid cooldown show up during a dungeon encounter. Then we have a few other options. There's show deathline, and this will show a red vertical line where you last died on the fight. And this is useful if you want to set a reminder to remind yourself how not to die next time you actually get there. You can control the sound channel over which TTS countdowns and sounds are played, and you can control the volume of the TTS. If you want to give your reminders a quick try, you can use the simulate button here in the bottom left. What this does is when you click it, it'll make the add-on go through the fight as if you are actually playing it. And you can start the fight at any point on the timeline. It'll always start on the left of where you are currently viewing the timeline. So let's say I want to see what these 3 reminders look like. So I would move the timeline so it starts just before these reminders should show up, and then I click simulate. And you can see they now show up at the top here. The green bar is how far the add-on is progressed through the fight. And this will not only show the reminders, it'll also play text-to-speech, sounds, and countdowns. So you can figure out what those sound like. And then lastly, we are brought to the import and export button. So let's just turn off our MRT reminders for now and go into this menu. When you open this up, you can either import reminders or export them. When you click export, it'll export the reminders from the timeline that you're currently viewing, and it'll only export the ones from the profile that you're currently viewing. So you can see these 5 reminders are in the menu here in MRT note format. So you can copy them and you could put them in the MRT note so others can see them too. You can also export it as a string. And this is intended for sharing between users. So someone else could take this string, put it in the import window, and then they would have exactly these 5 reminders that you just made. You can also export this and import it into a different profile. So let's copy this string and go into the 3 heal profile we made earlier. And we can now go to import and paste it in here and import them. You are now importing 5 reminders, just click confirm. And you can see that the 5 reminders we had in our other profile are now also in this profile. So when importing a string, you see a bunch of options. Let's say you have a buddy in your raid and he likes to make all of his reminders pink, but you like your reminders to be some different color. You could choose to not import the colors of his reminders. And let's say he adds an annoying sound to all of his reminders. Maybe you don't want that either, so you'd uncheck import sound before importing. And that's everything for now. The link to my Patreon, where you can get timeline reminders, is in the description below. It's good to mention that just 1 person per guild has to be subscribed for everyone to use the add-on. When you do subscribe, you receive a code that lets you keep timeline reminders updated through WoW Up, much like any other add-on. Thanks for watching.